Well, folks, this is a very serious session, and I have a very unserious background. So this is the Golden Girls living room. I'm not sure anyone would mind, but
Julian, I can match you with unserious backgrounds if you want.
Let's
entirely
do
up.
this.
That's entirely up to you.
It was so funny. I had my designer come up with all kinds of great backgrounds, and it was all dependent on like a certain kind of setup. And then the camera broke halfway through my second or third session. And so we had to switch to a different thing. But, you know,
I most often
we have
use
fun
this
over
one.
here at GetGlobal. And I'm so glad that I've got partners who also have fun.
Yeah, no, I most often use the Millennium Falcon, but I thought for this I probably wouldn't use. Yeah, but
That's a good one.
I thought I probably wouldn't go with the background on this occasion, but I can get even sillier. I can do Queen if you like.
Yes, yes. I love this.
There's of course, if you enjoy that show.
I love it. I love it. I think there's Leila. Cool. Well, wonderful. So we are talking about something that I know a lot of our attendees and participants and collaborators and speakers, they think about quite a bit, is what is going on with the UK in their global strategy. Obviously, Brexit got a lot of press. A lot of attention, a lot of hand-wringing, a lot of Sturm und Drang from within England and the other parts of Great Britain. But there's a lot going on that warrants a better look, a deeper look with experts, folks from the inside, people who are representing a company like ZeroAvia, and from the policy side with Toyota, and then you know, from legal element, which would be Taylor Wessing, Dave Bates. Then we've got a trade association, the Coalition of Service Industries, USTR alum. So, hi, Christine.
Hi.
This is our first time having Christine.
Yes.
But
so
she comes so highly recommended. Your colleagues adore you, Christine.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yes.
But I really, this is such a great panel, distinguished panel. So I'm just so happy to have been invited. And hi, Leila. I know it's been a long time since we've seen each other. But
I know. The last time we shared the stage was Capitol Hill before the wall came down.
I know. Well, anyway, thrilled to be on the panel and to see everyone and to be included. And I have to just say that I'm feeling very unsophisticated based on your discussion of screen backdrops. Mine is very boring. I don't have anything interesting like other of you. And, you know, my only choice would be to turn my camera around and show all the tennis shoes on my table. So that's the extent of my my choices for visual background. So sorry, I can't compete.
Well, Christine, can I offer you some cheesecake?
I would love some cheesecake. I absolutely would.
All right,
we need to have a panel about why Christine has tennis shoes on her table.
I think that would be pretty boring too.
So I wanted to kick it off a little bit with David, actually. What have been the effects of Brexit so far? Not only in the actual switchover and the rules coming down and everything, but the anticipation before it. Were the fears founded? What did it actually change in the calculation of a lot of companies, and how do they think about this stuff? Like from inside, you know, the room where folks call you when they're, you know, worried or come to you with their hair on fire, if something is warranting that.
Yeah.
What's it look like to you?
That's a really good question, Julian, and thank you. I think the answer is that when Brexit first happened back in 2016, we were all terrified as to what that would mean, and what that would mean for those of us that work in sort of inward investment to the UK. I think it's transpired over the course of a couple of years that the fears have not been, the reality has not been anywhere near as bad as we had feared. There've been sort of peaks and troughs through that, but certainly I think this year, since the trade deal, things have got back to what I would call normal, in the sense of lots of interest in the UK from North American companies. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. The combination of all the Brexit talk last year and COVID put a lot of companies sort of put the UK on hold. And we definitely saw a slowdown last year, but that has definitely reversed since sort of January this year. I think COVID, people have realized, well, this is just the way the world is. We can't keep deferring. We've got to make decisions and crack on with the business. And secondly, what the trade deal has done, and what people have come to realize, is that for a lot of sectors and a lot of industries, actually Brexit isn't as bad as people had feared it might be. If you're a digital-only business, really the effects are very limited. For a fintech business, pretty limited effects compared to what you have in the US, with the amount of regulation there across 50 different states. Some sectors more affected, particularly if you're moving goods across borders. But what most companies are saying to us is all they wanted was certainty as to what the regime would be and how things would operate. They now have that to some degree, and that will increase over time. And so they're able to move forward. So I think we're seeing definitely, I would say, a positive sentiment now, and people looking back to the UK as they always have traditionally. Now things are becoming much clearer and people are getting their heads around COVID. I don't think you can separate the two.
What do you say to that, Carlo?
Sorry. Yes, my experience and our role at the UK's Department for International Trade is basically business development for Britain. It's about helping US companies understand the UK proposition and hopefully take the decision to invest there. And it's also taking care of current investors in the UK. And what David is saying mirrors to what we are seeing as well. Obviously, there's been a drop caused by the pandemic and some worries about what the EU transition would mean. But we are still number one. The UK is still number one in attracting FDI in Europe. It's still a healthy position, and we are looking forward to a recovery this year, which I think will bring new activity.
So, and thank you, Carlo. In terms
Thank you for having me, by the way.
Oh, we've been wanting to do this for a long time, and I didn't realize it because I wasn't looking at the screen on the Zooms. You know, my manner of leaving my camera off unless it's something like this. The hair is kicking. You know, you've got the pandemic hair like me, and I don't know if I'll ever cut it. But and I'll turn to Christine and Leila on this. From a trade geek point of view, what has been the upshot and how has it affected in your case, Leila, and in your members, Christine? Let's start with Leila.
Well, Brexit, you know, I have to say the agreement that you reached, we're really pleased with what the negotiators were able to achieve, and they truly did take into account a lot of the concerns of the auto companies that do have manufacturing facilities in the UK. And we have two. We have a plant in Wales and a plant in the north of England. And so very important to us, as David said, to have that certainty. And I want to underscore that it's not so much about tariffs, which is, I think, what's gotten a lot of attention. It's really about the ability to get goods in and out. And, you know, there's about 12,000 lorries that go between the UK and the EU every single day just for the auto industry. That's not including pharma or agriculture. And so, you know, things that could come in and out easily, having to go through and see all the product on that. I mean, we've all just witnessed what happened with the gridlock in the Suez Canal and how critical it is just being able to get access to goods. But, you know, we're quite pleased. And I have to say, too, that even after the referendum vote, before we knew what Brexit would entail and what a post-Brexit world would look like, Toyota selected London as the site of its Toyota Connected, which is our sexy startup mobility tech firm, which we put in London and not on the continent, even though it is Toyota Connected Europe. And I think that speaks volumes about the UK's sort of really leading role in the science and tech space. And I really encourage companies to look into that, because I think that is a true strategic advantage for Britain moving forward.
Oh, you're on mute, Christine.
So from the services perspective, just going back to Taylor's comments, I think among CSI members, there was a huge amount of anxiety and now nail biting about, you know, would there be a cliff and would they all go off it? And was there a need to move headquarters, particularly in the financial services area? And there was some of that occurred definitely out of London, but by and large, totally agree with, in terms of the way things turned out, that there was a relatively soft landing and it wasn't the horror story that many feared and thought could have occurred. And I also would agree with Leila that the agreement produced in the UK EU negotiations on the whole is useful. Although from a services and digital trade perspective, I would just highlight a couple ongoing issues. One is, and I won't dwell on this, but the services commitments themselves in the agreement are relatively weak. And by that, I mean, they don't really go beyond what was agreed to basically already under the GATS agreement and the WTO and in terms of EU commitments. So not much marketing opening there. But two, and more importantly, there is a digital chapter that's included in the agreement, which is a good thing. And for the first time, the EU did agree to a data localization prohibition, which certainly CSI services companies and digital companies care very much about. Data localization has been a huge problem globally. And so this is an area where actually the EU has been more like-minded, even though they're not on cross-border data transfers. So it's a useful thing to have that covered in the agreement, as well as the other provisions that I would call more of the formalities, like electronic signatures, e-contracts, things like that. But also forced prohibitions on forced transfer of source code and access to open government data. So all of that is good. So the open pieces, though, in terms of the UK are, it's still, the UK still doesn't have an adequacy determination from the EU, and there are a few more steps that need to happen in that regard. So US companies are still, you know, waiting for that and see that as an important step. Unfortunately, there is some continuing distrust on the EU side that in the UK, there is too close a relationship with the US and therefore potential access by US intelligence authorities to data in the UK. So, you know, that's a continuing area we're watching. But on the whole, back to your original question, I think we would agree that as far as the Brexit negotiations, there really was a relatively soft landing and that companies are adjusting. And final point I would make along the lines of one of Leila's comments is that I think I would say by and large, my member companies are still looking to London as a very important center of business. So let me stop there.
That was very informative. Interesting points. And I'm curious, you know, so what our speaker in the next session is Frank Lavin. He's a former Undersecretary of Commerce and former ambassador to Singapore, and now he's doing e-commerce things focused on China. But there's something that he, you know, when he's talking to companies about where they're going and what they're doing and how they expand into foreign markets, you know, a lot of folks come and chat him up about like, and me, frankly, now for that matter, a lot. Like, we hear that this place has great incentives, the tax thing is over there, and tariffs this, tariffs that. And he's like, look, that stuff can change at any moment. You really need to be focused on what's going on with the fundamentals of the market and why you really need to be in any given country, right? You're there for customers, you're there for talent, you're there for a variety of reasons. Technology, friend relationship with the United States. These are all things that that folks need to be considering before they start factoring in stuff like just tax or this or that, right? Or being led by that, tax is really important, but it's not a strategy in and of itself, right? Like you can't pay your employees in taxes. So you can't report your tax savings and expect that to be the thing that makes your stock market go, your stock price go crazy. So the fundamentals of, and this came up in an earlier session, like when it comes to talent and things like that, Carlo, why are you, and this is something, you know what? We're going to ask Sergey this. Sergey, hi, how you doing?
Good, excellent.
I think that this lighting situation and angle is actually not bad. I'm wondering when your hip hop album is going to drop. So why'd you guys choose London?
Let me try something innovative like this. Okay.
No, I was thinking it, man. It was good. So why did you guys choose London, and also tell us a little bit about what ZeroAvia does. I think a lot of the folks watching will be interested to know what you do.
So ZeroAvia is, yeah. So ZeroAvia is, originally it was a California startup, and we are manufacturing the powertrain for aircraft. Basically, you can consider us the sustainable version of Rolls-Royce. Okay, the engine manufacturing part of Rolls-Royce, or Pratt and Whitney, or any engine manufacturer for the aircraft. And for us, it was a very interesting decision, and we made it actually before Brexit happened, and it was about 2.5 years ago. And we did quite an extensive scan of how different countries look at helping different startups and technology developers in different countries. And we understood that UK was actually by far the best out of all the European countries, the United States under the Trump organization, of course, and any other countries pretty much. And it was simple from the application standpoint. It was simple in terms of the clarity of the criteria and the speed of making the decision. And this is basically was the first factor why we actually moved our hydrogen development facility to here in the UK. So the second thing, and this is exactly, we looked at the fundamentals, and the fundamentals in the UK are actually excellent in aerospace. So the talent intrinsically is here. There are a lot of big players like Rolls-Royce, Airbus, Safran, etc. They are here as well, and therefore, getting the talent attracted to our company was pretty easy. And the last but not the least is that the sustainability angle. Again, the fundamentals, right? So the sustainability angle and the sustainability promotion and supporting here in the UK is on top of the agenda. And that was I guess the last pretty important and decisive factor why we actually landed in the UK.
Are you hearing similar things, Carlo?
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you for saying that. That's exactly goes to what the UK strategy, I think, as an FDI destination has been. It's not about trying to have the biggest headline incentive. It's about being the most attractive overall market. Latest World Bank rankings, the UK is ranked number 8th in ease of doing business, top among all all major European economies. That's up a notch also overall from last year. By comparison, the US is 6th, so about the same level. UK was actually ranked higher, but uncertainty around EU exit brought it a bit down. There's also a really firm commitment on part of government to position the UK as an innovation economy to attract companies like ZeroAvia. There's a future fund, which is, 375 million pounds for co-investment to support the scale up of innovative R&D intensive businesses. There's 1 billion plus in pounds, not dollars, net zero innovation portfolio whose goal is to double spending on energy innovation. There's a generous R&D incentive that I think is world class. It's a competitive market, and it's designed for companies to be successful over the long term.
Leila, does that jive with what you heard about your facilities there?
Yes, and I just want to add, like, yes, we've had Brexit, but the UK didn't physically leave the geography of Europe, right? And the ability to travel to the continent, once COVID issues are more settled. And so I think that's another huge plus. And I love, Carlo, the innovation nation. I think that really is a huge selling point for the UK. And, the government just released their Global Britain strategy, which is this 100-some odd pages. And I encourage people to really look at that. I think it lays out a great framework for what the UK plans to do. And as Carlo said, these funding that's available, these things, it's not necessarily a tactical plan, it's more strategic, but I think that's very helpful to understand. And I mean, Britain is quite ambitious. When I spent a short stint at our office in London working on Brexit issues in the summer of 2018. In that time, Carlo, I met with your colleagues at DFID, and and they had said they wanted to replicate all the FTAs that the EU had. We thought, oh my goodness gracious, how on earth are they going to do that? And lo and behold, you've got 40 with 70 some countries, including Japan. And I mean, it's just really incredible and really makes it a lot easier. And this year in particular, I think is tremendous opportunity for the UK on the world stage by hosting the G7 in June and also the COP meeting in November. So those are two huge events. And I think that a great opportunity, again, hoping travel is open for companies to come. And there's so many, all the side events on the sidelines of those are really great business opportunities.
Folks at home, you're hearing from a pro who does this. There's a reason why folks and companies and stuff like they go and pay a lot of attention to these places. And particularly if they're trying to interact with the government that's hosting them. She just dropped some knowledge. Now, I want to think a little bit about so the market dynamics within, or the fundamentals along the lines of talent and innovation and the incentives that you mentioned and the effects of Brexit weren't as bad as people expected. What about the fallout from the pandemic and the impact that could have on the UK's fiscal position? Do you guys have any insight on how that would, reorder priorities or what the recovery forecast would be like? And is there even any way to know for sure just yet? I mean, I know that the UK has had some really good success in getting folks vaccinated, so that's probably going to be a great thing. But any sense of what folks need to be prepared for in order to make good decisions about how they position themselves in England, UK? Sorry.
Sure, I'm happy to start on that one, Julian. I mean, I think you're right about the vaccination. It's gone incredibly well in the UK. The NHS has kind of saved the day. Having a centralised health system that's been able to roll out the vaccination has been, there's a lot of problems with the NHS, but it's really come to the fore here. As of the end of last week, I think more than 60% of the population, or the adult population, had at least had one shot, which is enabling the economy to open up much quicker. Certainly if you compare that to the rest of Europe, where they're in the single-digit percentages in most countries in Europe for inoculation at the moment, the UK is way ahead, and that has the obvious consequence of enabling the economy to be opened. Growth forecasts are very strong. The Bank of England recently raised them to 4.75% in 21 and 5% in 22. Most of the independent commentators think that's low. Goldman Sachs's figures for what they're worth are 5.5% and 6.5%, so a bit higher than the Bank of England's. So I think coming back to sort of fundamentals of where the economy is, the great news is that the economy is going to be opening up. It wouldn't surprise me if we saw some sort of US-UK travel corridor opened up, possibly before one is opened up with Europe. I know there's a lot of people pushing for that, certainly through New York. If both countries sort of continue doing very well on vaccination and the numbers are going in the right direction. So all of that can help, I think, help trade as well.
Carlo, do you have a sense of where that where things might be going?
Yeah, although I wanted to make an additional comment on the growth forecasts because they sound high, right, in the current.
But it's also rebound, right?
But it's there exactly. So I think there's two factors that to think about when you look at those growth rates. The first factor is that the UK has invested about 20% of GDP into COVID recovery and resilience. There's a variety of these programs, including an 80% covering 80% of salaries for furloughed workers, various grants and loan schemes, all of that designed to make sure that the economy doesn't come apart, but rather goes into, I don't know, I'd call it maybe like a stasis while we wait for the pandemic to end so that it can bounce back really quickly. I've been incredibly proud to actually be able to tell businesses about the UK's COVID recovery scheme. Because I think it's going to be very effective and enable a very quick bounce back. The other thing to look at is the savings rate in the UK. The average savings rate in last year nearly tripled in the UK. It went up to something like 17%. So consumers have been sitting on cash that they're not spending except maybe on deliveries while they sit at home waiting for this thing to end. So there's a lot of purchasing power that's just kind of lying in wait. And that's why the Bank of England has given that forecast and why a lot of people think that 5% for next year may actually be significantly lower than what we really will see.
Yeah, I mean, most of the forecasts, and this is coming up in our next session, most forecasts are expressing it just in terms of like, at what point do we get back to where we were in March of last year, right? And seems like most folks are thinking Q3, Q4. We'll have a couple of real geeks on that kind of subject coming up, but now that we've been talking about this, I want to talk about England and the world, right? Or UK and the world. Sorry, guys, I'm forgetting other parts of the country that are very important. Maybe it's because I'm a Californian and I think that California is the most important state. But
Julian, can I interrupt just before you go to the UK and the world? I don't want to be a real skunk at the picnic, but going back to the question before the last one that was addressed, in terms of concerns and business environment post Brexit, the one of the areas that my members are concerned about and watching really closely is the digital services taxes that the
that was my
UK.
next question.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
No, good. You read my mind.
I mean, I saw that more in the context of business factors, business environment. So I can stop there just to say that they really are worried about that, and they hope that the British will be willing to back off and wait for the OECD negotiations to finish. So I don't know that there's a lot more I can say in that regard, but just flagging it as one area for the audience of businesses that do engage in digital business would undoubtedly be affected by that DST, depending on the particular business they were engaged in. But if it's online marketing, online sales, very likely to be affected by that.
This came up on the call along with the Data Protection Act of 2020. We do have a lot of digital companies on the line, but and so folks got to know what's coming down the line. David, what's your take on these matters?
So on data privacy, if I can deal with that one first, is it's probably the easiest. I mean, I think Christine's absolutely right. There hasn't yet been an adequacy decision. that the UK has sufficiently adequate data protection measures. But what the UK has done is it has placed into domestic law the GDPR from Europe effectively whole. So the GDPR stands in the UK currently as it does in the rest of Europe. And that's the UK's basically primary tool for getting an adequacy decision. The technical board that advises the European Commission on adequacy decisions has recommended that the UK be given an adequacy decision. That was a couple of weeks ago now. I think the strong expectation for everyone I speak to who's an expert in the field is that an adequacy decision will follow, notwithstanding the sort of worries about the closeness of intelligence cooperation with the US, but probably with a message for the UK that it needs to keep sort of to the EU standard and not deviate from it once it has once it's got the adequacy decision. So I think there will be good news on data privacy relatively soon. On the Digital Services Act, you're right, this is a concern. I think the UK government has said that it's very committed to an OECD solution. And personally, I think you can't separate the politics, from this. Amazon paying less tax in the UK than a corner shop doesn't, go across very well politically, despite massive sales. So I think the UK is hoping that there'll be an OECD solution and is effectively trying to leverage cooperation at the OECD level to get a solution globally to this issue. Certain countries like the French have probably gone a bit further than the UK. I think the UK is more willing to cooperate, and Carlo will have a better take on this than me, but my sense is the solution here does lie with the OECD, and hopefully something can happen there.
Carlo?
Actually, I think David has said it very, very well, and I agree that it is not envisioned that this unilateral action will continue past an OECD solution to the issue. I think it's also important to keep in mind that the threshold for companies affected by a DST is very high. It's a global earnings threshold. David, I can't remember the number, maybe you do, but it is a very high threshold, so it's not going to affect the majority of companies that would be listening on this call today.
Correct. I can't remember the exact number, but it's in the many hundreds of millions, quite deliberately. It's quite clear who it's aimed at. It's not meant to attract emerging companies or affect emerging companies.
We got quite a few that would have hit that figure.
Right.
So
You may, but can I just put in my 2 cents in that regard?
Or your several hundred million.
Despite that, yeah, I mean, there may be just a particular few that are being targeted in particular, which, so we're concerned about the discriminatory aspect, but we're also concerned about the precedent generally, particularly because we do believe it is discriminatory. So again, you're right, there may be the smaller companies that won't be affected, but from our perspective, it's still an overall matter of concern.
I feel like Leila is like ready to pull out the popcorn. What's your position on all this, Leila?
Yeah, you're very good at reading cues, on the virtual platform. I'm curious what everyone thinks about the Biden administration's calls for like a global minimum corporate tax.
This is the hottest topic in Washington right now. I was just there for an entire month last month, and everybody was talking about it.
Yeah, and whether it'll supersede the discussions on a DST, which OECD is trying to steer. And so, lots of swirl right now. I hesitate to say anything, but it sounds like, they want companies over certain, $20 billion or such global revenue to pay their fair share in the markets where they operate. And so, as anyone who's worked on the tax code knows, once you open that bad boy, it's Pandora's box. And so you may just want to focus on this slice of it, and you can't. I mean, everybody in their interest gets involved in the chats, at least here in Washington. And so I'm really curious how that goes with talks about a DST, but also a carbon border tax or all these other taxes that are under discussion.
Well, Sergey, what's your position on all this? I'm just kidding.
I mean, I'm just kidding. I would love to be in the, in the hundreds of millions, and then in billions. I think, That's the place to be, and we're not there yet, but soon, of course. Just read the headlines in a couple of years. But I think our position on the taxes slash regulation. I think that it's an we consider this as an opportunity as well as a threat. So for us, it's more like the opportunity in the from the regulatory standpoint, because for example, our main regulatory body is the Civil Aviation Authority, right? And they dictate what are the rules applied to companies like us for us to gain the permit to fly, to certify our powertrain and our engines. And typically, they're pretty homogenized with other authorities. But at the same time, I think that they're looking for the opportunities to actually show off a little bit and claim the stick sort of in the ground, that we were the first to certify things like for example ZeroAvia does. And I think that in other regulatory bodies, and I think that they might use this opportunity to be sort of special in the regulatory space, and sort of show off a little bit on the global stage. And it's an opportunity for us in particular to work directly with our local pretty renowned aviation authority, and have a very close and special relationship in that space. So I think it's so far it's been great for us, and hopefully for other industries it works similar with the regulator.
The reason I kind of chuckled when I asked you about it is because I kind of get the vibe that you're just soaking up talent and making stuff, and that was the place to do it. And so cool. There's a lot of trade agreements that you guys have been up to and wanting to get into. And, in our first year of GetGlobal, we had Wendy Cutler just coming out of the negotiations of TPP at the end of it. We had 2 or 3 former undersecretaries of commerce, no, 2 undersecretaries of commerce, former undersecretaries of commerce, and then the current one at the time. We had some amazing trade people. And I told people, I was like, TPP is going to be a big deal. You really need to know what this is. It's not just Hillary and Bernie screaming at each other, or whatever the hell Glenn Greenwald is talking about. This is serious stuff, and it's going to mean a lot to you if in certain markets like Japan, and depending on how it matures, it can mean a lot of things, and a lot of other places too. So with that said, I think everybody kind of realizes now that the Trump administration has just had a lot of fun pulling levers, not really knowing in many cases what they quite do. And then it sounds like they kind of got the hang of certain things, others not so much. USMCA now is a new thing. We've got the digital chapter, a few major updates that needed some updating. But now the upshot of what I'm trying to say is that I think this audience understands a lot better now that trade is actually a thing and affects them, and it's something that they should be paying attention to. So especially for the e-commerce folks out there, but the digital ones too. This isn't just trade in physical goods. It's trade of all kinds. What is the position right now of the UK with all these agreements that they've been up to? Leila, you nailed this at GetGlobal 2019. So I'm curious, what do you make of UK's global position vis-a-vis trade?
Well, you want, okay, I'll take the first stab. Well, I have to say, I was actually in the Obama administration, slip of tongue there, which is now called the Obama-Biden administration here in Washington. But during TPP and work to try and promote the deal. And Wendy Cutler's a good friend, and I deeply respect her. If you were to have told us back then that in a few years the US would be completely out of TPP and the UK would be trying to get in, we would have made a big wager that that would never happen. So I think that just shows you how things can just completely change. And I just applaud the UK's ambition in striking these trade deals. I think it really is, when you talk about certainty, that is really important. Now, that said, when, you know, Toyota or large companies make sort of investment decisions, you know, there's a lot of moving parts that play into that. And like you said, Julian, it's not what's the tax rate, and it's not, you know, what FTAs do they have. That's clearly very important, but there's so many other factors. And for Toyota, our philosophy is to build where we sell and to buy where we build. So making sure we can buy, you know, the parts and components where we are, that we have the workforce, that we have sort of all the things that we need. And I think for the UK, what's really attractive is, for us, there are 2 plants in the UK. We, you know, 80% of the exports currently were going to the continent, but with all these new deals, that opens up avenues to export to other markets, right? And so you can reframe it, and, you know, you traditionally look at the world in terms of regions, right? Not necessarily specific countries. And that's why I made the point that the UK is still part of the geography of Europe. It's very important when you think about those things. And I'm curious what other trade deals the UK is looking to, and also what you seek to do through the WTO, because now you're on your own and working with Geneva and some of the things that have gotten stuck there. How what role you intend to play on that front? Because that, again, is a very important avenue for global companies to adjudicate issues and to also set the rules of the road for trade amongst all 164 member countries.
Christine, what do you think?
So a couple things. One is, just wanted to say a couple things, and folks are probably already aware of this, but that there has been a tremendous amount of progress that's been made in the US-UK FTA negotiations, particularly in the areas that we watch really closely. So cross-border services, financial services, telecom, digital trade, and we also watch the customs chapter pretty closely as well. And so there, and investment, also progress been made. So in light of that, we did have a probably fairly naive hope that in the Biden administration, you would see a willingness to forge ahead and finish the agreement. Right now, talks have basically are suspended while Catherine Tai and the White House and others do a stock take of where things stand, which is not unusual when an administration comes in. But I think there's really, unfortunately, a big question mark hanging over what the US is going to do going forward. Because I think there are some real political challenges that the Biden administration faces in terms of what was achieved with the USMCA and Labor and the coalitions that was really fortunately put together with the NGOs and the unions. So anyway, a big question mark, which we hope will be ultimately resolved. And I would say that, again, in terms of the open issues that we watch most closely, DST would be one of them. It has been brought up in the FTA negotiations. Another is procurement and how that ends up. We hope there's a more reasonable approach than was taken in USMCA. But other than that, I think the agreement itself looks very, very similar to what was negotiated in the USMCA. And that's certainly the text that the US negotiators started from. And I think that they've adhered pretty closely to that. Another area which I think they're going to have to come to grips with is what's called Section 230, or interactive computer services liability. And that's basically the degree to which the platforms should have liability for incendiary speech or false speech things like that. And as I think all know, that's pretty controversial now. And the Biden administration itself has made some comments about 230 and how it should be changed, reformed. And so a question mark about whether that provision will stay in the trade agreement. So there are those open issues. But the fact is that the agreement itself and what's been negotiated so far, I think in our terms is very good and looks very much like USMCA and with the exception of investment where we thought it was a step backwards in terms of what came out on investment and the exclusion of investor state. But nonetheless, so it's a kind of a waiting game to see what happens. The second part of what you asked is the UK on the global stage and its outlook. Totally agree, and I think Leila said this already, that the UK is very, very forward-leaning, I think, in its trade policy and its approach. I think, they've said they want something like 80% of their trade covered by FTAs in the next 3 years, which is very ambitious. And they've certainly said that they prioritize their negotiations with Australia and with New Zealand. They formally went forward in February with submitting their application to accede to CPTPP. And I think all signs are that they clearly are trying to position themselves as an international global hub. And the last thing I want to say is just historically, based on our experience in working with the UK, not only in Washington, and in London, but also in Geneva, they are very forward-leaning and certainly on services and digital trade. And so I think that trend will definitely continue, and it's one which my members really appreciate and like to see.
Well, Carlo, what do you say to that?
I mean, I have to agree. And, if I can take a step back for a moment to the 2016 and the EU referendum, there's a lot of digital ink spilled on how this meant that the UK was going to somehow step back from the world and become more isolationist and less global. And I think the opposite has shown itself to be true. The UK's government has been very forthright with its ambition to be the global leader in free trade and to play a global role. And now that the EU agreement is complete, I think the UK has a real opportunity to redefine that global role. It's the second largest global exporter of services after the United States. And I think the UK can position itself as a trade hub for services, also for goods. But I think in services, the opportunity is particularly acute. And it can become, I think, a bridge for other countries, particularly in a world where there's regional blocs and there's some stalled multilateral liberalization efforts like the WTO's Trade and Services Agreement. And if Britain can position itself at the center of these overlapping trade agreements, it can then become a link between countries and blocs that don't have free trade agreements with one another and benefit from the free trade agreement the trade that flows from that, excuse me. The UK has that deal with Europe. We hope that the US one will come this year, if not this year, hopefully next year. It's applied to join the CPTPP. It could be the only major economy in the world, or the first major economy in the world to have free trade agreements with all three blocs. You can just imagine the growth that could result from that. And I think companies are going to want to position themselves to take advantage of that opportunity.
David, thank you, Carlo. And so David, from your seat and the conversations that you have and the items that you watch, like what kind of advice would you give companies as to like what to be looking ahead to, what kind of basically everything that Carlo and Leila and Christine just said. What does this mean for a company that's operating in the UK, and what should they expect to see?
I think you know, to Carlo's point, I think what they should expect to see is a continuation of this agenda in the UK. I think there's broad cross-party support for it in the UK as well, which will, I think, continue to mean the UK is an attractive place for sort of for your non-US hub, because you'll have these overlapping trade deals. And what you've also got to think about is all the other factors that go into a decision as to where to locate that hub. And some of those are the more soft factors, but they're still very important, actually. We find a lot of our clients, they like the idea of going to a country where there's a common language and a common heritage, where employment laws, for instance, are much more flexible than they are, say, in other countries in Europe. So it's, I think right at the very beginning, Carlo mentioned you've got to look at this as the whole package. And there are some hard facts around tax, around trade rules that apply, but there are also the soft factors, and they shouldn't be underestimated either as to the importance of them. If you're sending a senior executive over to Europe, where does he want to live? Does he want to live in London, or does he want to live in Frankfurt? History will tell you where most of them choose to go. So all of those factors are at play too.
So we're coming just to the end here. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I'm curious. I wanted to get back a little bit into what Leila was talking about. I bookmarked that, about how to use big events like what the UK is doing right now. So if we can, I'd like to come back to that. The other thing is that I've slipped up and said England instead of UK, but that also prompted me to think to myself, you've got Scotland, you've got Wales, like there's a lot of country around there. So what's going on in those areas? I think that folks think about the talent pool in London. It's certainly a hub city of the world and everybody knows it. But how should foreign investors be thinking about the other parts of the country? Let me ask Carlo.
I think they're all areas of tremendous opportunity. Since 2008 and the recovery from the crash in 2008, more of the growth has accrued to the southeast of the country, and the government has recognized that, and so has implemented something they call the leveling up agenda, which is about developing the rest of the country so that it comes up to the same level as London. And it's also part of the broader agenda of building back better, which means a more green, a more prosperous, resilient, and fair economy, equitable recovery across the UK. There's money going into the regions to try to stimulate economic development. We have a series of we call high potential opportunities, which are investment propositions for areas of specific opportunities around the rest of the country that we're highlighting to investors. And there's even some incentives that you can't get in England if you go to Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland. And the costs are often much more affordable. So I think there are areas of significant opportunity right now.
Yeah, and all my DJ friends love Scotland. And London, but all right. So we've got Frank joining up in a minute. We're talking trade already, Frank, but we're gonna broaden out to the rest of the world in a second. So Leila, what are your tips on how to use big events in years where folks are the belle of the ball to really move things forward? Sergey, also, like what you said about the Civil Aviation Authority, I think that's really cool. Like, just recognizing opportunities to get in good with the right ones. What is your philosophy? What is your playbook and words of advice?
So, and this is, of course, pre-COVID, when people actually traveled and attended things in person versus virtual. And I have to say, I worked for the World Economic Forum, their annual meetings in Davos for years. And it was when I was in grad school. And what was fascinating to me is, although they had this robust agenda with all these meetings, the actual action was all the side meetings. There were 5-6 times as many side meetings. And they had all these rooms in the conference center there in Davos where you could instantly, but that was one of my jobs, I was one of the girls who had the precursor to an iPad. It was like fascinating technology back in 2004, where people would come and they could book the room and go in, and just watching that was really, and it just so illuminating to see, oh, that's where things actually happen. It's not on the stage, it's not at the dinners, it's on the sidelines, because you go where everyone is going to be, and that it was a magnet, right? And so fast forward to COP21 in Paris, where we had in 2015 the climate agreement reached. I was with another company at the time in the solar industry, and so again, you're there because everybody else is there, whether it's companies that you want to work on joint ventures with, or whether it's government officials you want to meet. And I remember talking to a delegation from Sri Lanka about installing solar panels in rural villages. I mean, it's just, you go where everybody is. And so again, I don't know what the restrictions will be with COVID, but with both the G7 and usually the UN General Assembly meetings in New York City and the States, and with the COP meetings, I mean, you go because everyone is there, whether it's public figures, whether it's international organizations, whether it's other private companies, and you can really just it's an energy there too. And there's like this cultural lift of being there together and building these bonds. And it's really just a great way to get a lot of business done in a very short time.
And I've been to Davos a couple of times for the meeting, and it's amazing which companies know what to do and how to do it right, and which ones do not.
Yeah.
They kind of show up, they didn't work with their contact right at the forum or whatever, but any of these things, you really got to nail that and get it right. And if you do, walk away with a lot of goodies and information and great meetings. So Sergey, I hope you go to COP26.
Yeah, this is definitely an opportunity for us, and especially it's because we are right in the right spot, in the sustainable aviation, which is, it can be one of the worst polluters in 2050 if we don't do things right. And of course, we are targeting to showcase our technology and get some contacts if people actually will be able to meet in person. But at least we are going to fly in hydrogen in COP26 if things go as planned. But also I think that it's I wanted to point out the thing which Carlo just mentioned about leveling out, and I think COP26 in Glasgow, there are different regions which are supported here in the UK, and I think that again, this is Brexit thing is again they've been special. It's an opportunity, and I think that the UK is actually utilizing it quite smartly by actually doing things in a special way and supporting different regions in the special way, so that the leveling up of different regions happening as efficiently as possible. For example, in our case, developing of different hydrogen zones is quite an important component of this policy. So yeah, exactly. I think that we are in the right place at the right time.
And what's cool about what you're saying here too is that, like, I remember when the drone companies here in the US were starting to take off, and they, there was this perception by a lot of them early on that like the FAA would not be their friend, and the FAA was their friend, and they were really easy to deal with. They developed a lot of, there was a great exchange, super easy to talk to. Sounds like you're saying the same thing about what's going on in the UK. I mean, that's not the same as like cold hard fundamentals like market size and stuff like that, but that stuff really matters particularly in highly regulated industries and in areas where like government's going to be the biggest buyer, right? and with innovation like this. And one thing I've been noticing is that just kind of seeing fewer like, you know, startups with silly ideas and a lot more serious ones, right? Like space exploration, you know, like what you're doing, like really hardcore stuff. Like the startup world has gotten its act together. You know, I remember in late 2000s that there was something like, you know, crazy valuation on a company that made e-stickers or something, right? It was bananas. And so yeah, I think that this trend is something that will continue, and certainly something to shout about. So very interesting. Thank you all so much for joining and participating in this. Christine, wonderful having you for the first time, and you too, Sergey.
I'm so happy you included me. Thank you so much, and really enjoyed listening to all of you and your comments and learned a lot. So thank you.
Well, you know something, I don't know if it's been that I've been back in Los Angeles too long, but it's just so relieving to hear complete answers. Thank you. Like that's something that I love about DC, and we're just complete. It was like reading a newspaper article, like the way that people described Big New Brzezinski when he talked. So that was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Carlo, David, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for partnering with us on this. And we'll chat in the next few days, I hope. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Good to see you.